My name is Ted Harrington, and I'm one of the partners at Independent Security Evaluators. And what we're here to talk about today is something that I care a lot about, which is hacking stuff. In particular, we're going to talk about the idea of hacking connected devices. Connected devices are what comprise the so-called Internet of Things. And for those of you who might not be familiar with this concept, at its most basic level, IoT is essentially the idea of being able to communicate with something. So that could be by Wi-Fi, that could be by cellular, Zigbee, Bluetooth, you name the protocol. It doesn't necessarily matter how you communicate with it, but the idea that you can communicate with it. It's really interesting to me that in the media and entertainment business, there has not yet been a lot of discussion about IoT, at least in a security context. IoT produces, or I should say introduces, the possibility to produce a lot of great benefits that the industry would care about. It provides the ability to have new ways to remotely administer things on a remote production set, for example. There are ways to access systems on a studio lot. It provides new ways to implement new monetization schemes. It provides new ways for consumers to access content. But then, of course, it also introduces all kinds of new attack surfaces as well. So for an industry that genuinely cares and invests resources accordingly about security, this is a topic that the industry might want to start thinking about, because without adequately considering the security implications of deployment of connected devices, ultimately what it's doing is unwittingly adopting new risk. One of the challenges with IoT today is that many people think of it as a consumer issue. Meaning, well, if that person wants to install Amazon Echo or a connected light bulb or fill in the blank connected device in their home, that's ultimately their decision. How does that actually affect the business? Well, all of those same consumer issues apply to the business because these same devices are being deployed at the business. You probably can't go to a studio lot across town today and not see a smart TV in the conference room. Not to mention, there are also other types of connected devices that are beyond the consumer-grade types of things. You've got everything from cameras and other types of security equipment, physical security devices that have the ability to communicate with them, as well as more production-level type cameras and other types of equipment that would be at the production set that have the ability to communicate with them remotely. So in terms of just context, one thing that you're going to see is, as we go through the various issues that I'm going to analyze, you'll notice a common thread across everything that we talk about, which is this concept of this adversarial perspective. So at our company, we perform security assessments, security research, and security training. And the one thing that weaves through all of those is that we look at everything not from the lens of, does this meet some sort of checkbox? Does this meet some baseline requirement? But how would an attacker violate this system? And why would that attacker violate this system? Because attackers are absolutely discerning. They choose who they want to go after and why, and then they pursue that accordingly. So everything that we'll go through today will have some of that same commonality woven through it. So I like to keep things super simple, so we're going to have basically three things we talk about today: context of the problem, some of the specific problems themselves, and then solutions to address for the problem. So let's focus on first context, simple as ABC. We're big believers in data-informed decisions. I think probably most people in this room would agree that data helps inform decisions. And one of the things that we noticed as a security research organization was that a few years ago, there was a lot of disjointed research that showed maybe there were security flaws in a particular device, or a particular manufacturer was putting out devices that had a problem. But there really wasn't a cohesive, exhaustive analysis of the issue across the industry. So in partnership with DEF CON, which is the preeminent security research conference in the world, we put together this concept known as IoT Village. IoT Village is basically like a traveling circus, if you will, where we go around to a few of the major security conferences throughout the United States over the course of a year, and we basically get a bunch of smart security researchers together to look at the problems connected to connected devices. So basically, we're bringing the community together to try and shine a spotlight on this issue in order to talk about solutions. IoT Village basically has 3 components to it. One is we have live demonstrations. This is a pretty cool shot of a researcher getting swarmed by press right after he shot a drone out of the sky, just by issuing a command. I thought it was pretty cool. Others were maybe a little horrified as this physical device came crashing down. We also procure a number of connected devices, including this super creepy doll, and we hack away on them. You could actually make this doll swear at kids. The whole point is you talk to it, and we say, well, what can you make it say? And then, of course, we have your more traditional lecture-style presentations where researchers are coming and presenting research that they have found across whatever the area of interest is for them. So effectively, IoT Village is a platform. Our company organizes it, but what we're doing is galvanizing a community. And one of the things that's been really interesting is it's been able to give us a statistical insight into what is happening with connected devices from a security standpoint. So in the about 15 months or so we've been doing this, probably more like 18 by this point, this platform has published 113 zero-day vulnerabilities. A zero-day vulnerability, if you aren't familiar with the term, is a high severity or critical vulnerability that exists in a live production system. Meaning someone could be exploited right now. Not this is in development and in the future at some point maybe this will be a problem. Meaning the defender has 0 days to respond. We found these 113 O-days across 51 different device types and 39 different manufacturers. So what that showed us was that the security challenges are really systemic across connected devices. If the manufacturer count had been low or the device type count had been low, that might have suggested a problem with a particular manufacturer or a particular device. But because those numbers are relatively high, it's suggesting that this really is permeating across the industry. So some of those flaws that we identified, when we look at the count from 2015, there were somewhere in the mid-50s. I forget how the 113 breaks down between 2015 and 2016, but they primarily fell into these 7 main categories. Things like denial of service, lack of encryption, weak key exchange, etc. So it was then interesting to look at 2016 to see how did that change? Were we seeing more of these issues, less of these issues, the same, whatever? And what we found this year was, or 2016, all of these were present again. So that suggested to us that despite the tremendous amount of attention that has been now put on this particular issue, we've had really a lot of press traction around this. The problem's not getting better. We also found additional issues, including things like injection attacks, buffer overflows, etc. So this showed that not only is the problem not necessarily getting better, it could be surmised that the problem's actually getting worse. And that would be consistent with my hypothesis of what's going on with connected devices, that in most cases they're being deployed with little or no security adequately being considered in them. And that effectively is introducing new attack surface to whatever environment it's deployed in. But there's such an appetite for these devices that the manufacturers nevertheless are very enthusiastic about deploying them. So maybe we can talk about some of the specific problems. When I think about IoT, I think not about someone hacked the camera, or someone hacked the baby monitor, someone hacked the lock. Think more about how it is as a weapon. There's really 2 definitions of when you think about this word, to weaponize, right? To convert to use as a weapon, or to supply or equip with weapons. That is exactly what IoT effectively is doing for an attacker pool. It's giving them new ways to attack environments. Because if you're deploying new ways to communicate with that environment and security is not adequately baked into either the device itself or how the device is deployed in that environment, ultimately the adversary has more ways to try to win now. When we think about the media and entertainment industry and the adversaries who would potentially be interested in pursuing an attack, there are several things they could leverage connected devices in order to accomplish. They could pivot. So we used the example a moment ago of the idea of the smart TV in the conference room. Well, if they can compromise that device, they can now pivot to other areas on that network. Maybe get to a pre-theatrical content asset. Or maybe they just activate the listening capability. I don't know if anyone saw the Vault 7 report last week, but basically WikiLeaks produced this report that said that the CIA has been spying on people using the native microphone in smart TVs for a very long time. Steal content we talked about as an extension of pivoting. Circumvent or undermine the monetization scheme. Degrade the user experience. Deny access. Or ensnare the studio in a botnet unwittingly. And I want to focus on an attack example that summarizes really these last four that I just mentioned. There was a very high-profile distributed denial of service attack against an internet service provider that took the internet effectively offline for a few hours on the East Coast last fall. Krebs on Security is a major security blog. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a great resource to hear what's going on in the security world, not just about IoT, but most topics. And they broke this story on October 21st that showed how a collection of connected devices were mobilized in a way to attack Dyn, which is part of the internet backbone. So it used what is known as a Mirai botnet. So maybe we just break that down really quickly. What is Mirai? It's a specific type of malware that is effectively used in connected devices. So what's a botnet? A botnet is basically a group of computing devices that have central control to them. A lot of times you'll hear the idea of a botnet described as zombies. Zombies operate without cognition in the same way that a botnet, a collection of compromised IoT devices, also do what they're told, not because necessarily that's what they're intended to do. And then finally, what is DDoS? So Verizon came out with this great commercial recently that I think summarized perfectly what DDoS is. The commercial had nothing to do with security whatsoever, but it painted the picture pretty well.
Look, a door. Let's all go through it together.
When it gets busy, it can get overwhelmed, like this.
I saw that commercial, I was like, that's DDoS. So effectively, that's what denial of service is, overwhelming the service so that it can't actually process legitimate traffic. What was really interesting about this particular strain of malware was that it also took advantage of the retry mechanism, which is where when you try to access a service and you're denied for whatever legitimate reason, it'll automatically try again. So what was happening was that as legitimate traffic's trying to access the service and all this flood of illegitimate traffic coming from these compromised connected devices, as all of those would fail, they'd then try again. So even the legitimate traffic was contributing to the attack. Another thing that was really interesting is that these devices were distributed geographically all over the world, these compromised devices. Yet the impact was felt predominantly on the East Coast of the United States. There were some other places as well, but that's really where the internet service was largely affected. It took services like Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, a few others offline, which of course had everyone feeling like this. They were very upset. They couldn't stream things on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 in the afternoon. But I poked some fun at it, but it really was a significant issue where access to these services was not viable. Now, if it was other services that maybe had to do with the critical infrastructure, delivery of healthcare, delivery of power, delivery of water. Perhaps your online banking. Maybe you're about to be late on a mortgage payment. Or, in the context of M&E, perhaps it had to do with some sort of production deadline, and you're effectively unable to use that service for a period of time. That could be catastrophic. There was real financial implications, too, for one element of the victim chain, which was the manufacture of one of the cameras that was ensnared in this botnet. And they actually had to recall 10,000 devices. There's a real financial and implied cost to doing that. And what's really interesting when you think about this attack is the victim chain. There were actually at least 4 different types of victims in this scenario. So first is, of course, the manufacturer. We just talked about how the manufacturer of that camera had to do a product recall. So that manufacturer, of course, was a victim. There are certain things they could do about it moving forward. There's certain implications that they could bake into their solution to make security more effective. There's also the shopkeeper who went and bought that camera and deployed it. Now that shopkeeper, what they care about is they want to make sure that someone doesn't break into their store and steal their inventory. They were compromised unwittingly, but there were still things that they could potentially do. They could change the default credentials. They could segment the risky devices they're deploying. Then, of course, there's the internet service provider, he who provides access to these services. We already talked about them a minute ago. And then ultimately, there is that ultimate end user. And what's really fascinating about this is the person who's trying to access Netflix. This person actually can do nothing about this particular attack. There's nothing they could have done differently that next time would have made this attack not succeed. So like so many other security problems across the entire spectrum of the media and entertainment industry, security is a shared problem. No single entity owns the problem. It's not just a content owner's problem. It's not just a vendor's problem. They share and collaborate on trying to solve that problem together. So finally, let's talk about what should we do about it. What are the solutions? It's never sufficient just to say there's a problem and then walk away. You need to understand how to go back to your organization and do something meaningful with this information. So I broke it into 2 groups, those who build things and those who use things. Now, as we go through these, you might want to note that many of these are going to apply outside of the purview of connected devices. So we've obviously been talking about hacking IoT today, but let's say you build a web application. It's not a connected device. Many of these same principles will apply. So first and foremost, those of you who are building things, whether it's that web app, you're building a connected device, you're the person who's in charge of architecting your network infrastructure. First and foremost, you need to have a threat model. Threat model is an exercise where you identify the assets you're trying to protect, the adversaries you care about defending against, and your collection of attack surfaces, of which maybe connected devices are part of them. Next, you want to understand and implement principles of secure design. I'd be more than happy to send you a white paper I wrote on this. These are universally understood truths about how to build systems resilient against attack. These are not my opinion. These are things that have been around for decades that basically the academic and research community all agree upon as how you can build resilient systems. So you want to make sure you have those integrated into whatever it is that you're building. You want to adopt the adversarial perspective. Whether it's someone on your team or you leverage an outside resource, at some point you need to be looking at things from the perspective of how will someone rip this apart and why? And be cognizant of not falling into the ego trap of thinking that because you have smart people at your company, which undoubtedly you do, that means inherently you will have already thought the way a hacker thinks. By thinking like a hacker, you'll be able to find those vulnerabilities and remediate them. And then, of course, you want to ultimately make sure that you have a security assessment of whatever you're building. I don't think anyone in this room would find that to be a foreign concept, so I don't need to go too deep into that. But basically the idea is make sure that all those things you've been doing are actually effective. Now, those who use, ultimately end users, you want to think about your attack surface, and wherever possible, you want to reduce that attack surface. So in the context of connected devices, a great example would be going back to this idea of a smart TV in your conference room. If you don't need the connectivity in the conference room on that TV, disable it. If the only purpose of that TV is to consume content that's either maybe you're looking at dailies on that, or maybe it's for video conferencing, maybe it's just to present slideshows, whatever it is, if you think that that TV itself, all it needs to do is be a monitor, then if you turn off the connectivity piece, you've now gotten rid of some of your attack surface. If you need the connectivity, that's okay. But the point is, understand what you have and make those conscious decisions about using things that you need. That goes hand in hand, of course, with audit and inventory. Know what you have. This can be somewhat challenging sometimes in an enterprise environment to know whether or not people outside the purview of IT or outside the purview of security have plugged things in. But nevertheless, that's a critical effort to go through, is to understand what you have, because by understanding what you have, you're then able to reduce attack surface. This one speaks specifically to connected devices. This is something you can do in your home life as well, but change the default credentials. This is like Security 101. Anyone knows to do this, but you'd be amazed how many people don't change the default credentials on their routers when they buy them, don't change them on any other connected devices when they take them home from Best Buy or wherever you bought them from. And attackers know this. It's not even hacking for them to find your device and log into it if you haven't changed the default password. Check for updates. Anyone that has an enterprise class in-house team that's managing your IT, you should be doing this already, but this applies also if you're connecting devices at your home. One of the things that we advise to individual consumers who aren't necessarily tech savvy is to check for updates at a periodic basis of something you already do regularly. So one of the recommendations would be, say, every quarter you prepare some report for your boss. Well, whenever you do that report, also go to the 10 websites of the 10 connected devices you happen to own at your house and go download whatever the updates are. Updates are almost always security patches or include some element of security, so you definitely want to do that. So that pretty much wraps it up for me. At the end of this, people always ask what we can do to help with various problems that we introduce. Security assessment I mentioned before. We also have a service that we call vCISO, and a way to think about it is like an augmented security team who you can basically have a fractional use of our experts. So just like Uber, you don't need to own the car to use the car when you need it. With us, you don't necessarily need to hire a cryptographer to help you with your crypto, but you can engage us to help you when you do need that.